makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
It should come as no surprise to anyone that I am not a fan of liberal centrists. And one of the things I despise most about liberal centrists is their hypocrisy. And one of the ways in which this hypocrisy manifests itself is in the way that they often deflect a legitimate criticism of their policies with identity politics. That is, they are being criticized on politics and they respond to the person undertaking the criticism with accusations that they are sexist or racist or whatever, assuming this person involved is a minority, and especially if the person doing the criticism is white or a man. And this is bad because I think, policy issues should be debated on their merit, not in this kind of ad hominem over who's doing them. And the best example of this was an exchange that I saw on Twitter quite recently involving someone who was one of the candidates for the recent New York City mayor election, Dianne Morales. And she was basically the one who self-styled herself as the progressive candidate in a race that was really not full of very good people. And this is quite surprising because I've always been shocked at how a city like New York, the wealthiest city in the world, a global cultural capital with almost every major international business headquartered there, with world-class universities like NYU and Columbia, produces such bad candidates. Bloomberg, for Christ's sake. And this race was not much different. I mean, the guy who eventually won, Eric Adams, not good at all. You had Andrew Yang, who is absolutely terrible. I cannot stand Andrew Yang. I think he's such a fake progressive, fake leftist. He's basically just your average tech libertarian in sheep's clothing, promoting the occasional progressive idea like UBI, but even then using it as basically a front for reducing the state. So he's just terrible. I can't stand him. And then his comments on the Israel-Palestine conflict were just completely unacceptable and derailed his campaign, thankfully, because at some point it looked like he was going to win. So among this race of clowns, Dianne Morales at some point seemed like the better one, the one that actually was a progressive, until we found out that she wasn't. And this was quite late in the race, late May. It was discovered that she was not particularly kind with her staff. She had, quote, one hell of a temper. And I guess there was massive amounts of bullying and other kind of bad workplace practices. So ended up in a number of her staff members quitting. Some were fired. They tried to unionize, and she fired the people who were trying to unionize. So we all know that union busting is one of the central pillars of left progressive politics, right? And there was a massive walkout. It was really embarrassing, and it just completely imploded. She went nowhere. And there was this piece in New York Magazine that really just summarizes exactly what she was about. The walkout, unprecedented in almost any campaign for high office, let alone one for mayor of New York City in the race's final days, came as there were increasing questions about Morales' commitment to progressive causes, including the revelation that she had voted for Andrew Cuomo over Cynthia Nixon in 2018 and was a supporter of charter schools. It was revealed that she had bribed the City Department of Environmental Protection inspector over an unpaid water bill, which led to her leaving her post as an official in Mike Bloomberg's Department of Education, which led to questions about what exactly a self-styled radical was doing working in Mike Bloomberg's Department of Education, or why after that she worked for a non-profit developer with a history of evictions. Progressive activists began to wonder how Morales, who has over the last few weeks become the, quote, it candidate of the city's left, had seemingly missed most of the fights they had been engaged in over the last several years. So, it's clear she's not a progressive. She was perhaps running because often it is convenient for liberal centrists to run under the mantra of progressivism, even when they're not. It is appealing to a certain demographic, especially young people, who otherwise wouldn't really find much of appeal in a standard liberal centrist status quo defending candidate. Anyway, now that you know what she is about, I'm going to show you the exchange. And it starts with Ross Barkan, who I think is a journalist or an author. And he wrote, "The Dianne Morales campaign imploded like no other in living memory. It was for a moment attracting serious money and attention. But a spate of controversy and an unprepared candidate unraveled it all." And is this the same guy who wrote this piece? No, not the same guy. Anyway, I guess one of Morales' supporters writes, "I'm tired. Dianne and her campaign had issues, but saying she has a hell of a temper and no history in the movement despite her nonprofit and community work is a painful reminder of the unfair scrutiny that women of color are still forced to face when running." So note that none of the criticism levied against her here have anything to do whatsoever with her identity. None of it. These are legitimate policy issues that she is clearly inconsistent in terms of the way that she brands herself as a progressive and the actual things that in practice she seems to support. This seems to me like an absolutely legitimate criticism to anyone, regardless of what your race is, what your religious beliefs are, what your sexual orientation is, what your gender. No, this is a policy issue that should be responded with in the same policy space, not with identity politics. And Ross replies, "The irony here is that the quote hell of a temper line was a quote from a person who worked directly with her and experienced this. And yes, being a non-profit exec for 10 years and voting for Cuomo and backing charters are not qualifiers for existing in left movement spaces." And he didn't even mention the union busting, which is, for me, the most egregious thing. Because the one thing that the US needs more than anything else right now is unions. And she replied, "I've quietly tolerated a lot of your biased journalism for a long time, but I will not tolerate you attempting to define my existence in any space. White men trying to tell me where I do or don't belong is one of the very reasons I ran in the first place. Not today, sir." There you go. That's the tactic in action. Deflect criticism of legitimate policy points by using identity politics, by putting yourself as the victim of unfair criticism because of some aspect of your identity. Ross replies, "Charter schools are quite literally neoliberalism. Yes, they are. And the privatization of education, an argument that public services have failed and only education beyond a unionized workforce can succeed with underperforming students driven out of the system." By the way, most of these underperforming students that will be driven out of the system will unfortunately be people of color. So I don't think there is any argument, any progressive argument for charter schools at all. They benefit, better off children who will more likely be white. Tolerate whatever you want. And she still replied, "I'm not looking to check your boxes, or anyone else's for that matter. You will not define me or tell me what space I can occupy on any day on any issues. If you want to ascribe to others' metrics, feel free to apply them to yourself. I'm not here for it." Others' metrics, I would say, are basically, every single progressive on this planet. This is insane that she thinks that she can get away with this. And again, some other guy replies, "Are you going to answer why you differ from the left-wing base on these issues, or just say he won't define you? You mean white progressives?" There you go. She couldn't reply at any issue, and there were 3 separate tweets which challenged her on policy positions, and in all of them she replied with trying to turn the argument around and making her seem like a victim. That is disgusting. And the worst part is that this, in some ways, might seem very effective, because when you are being accused of, essentially racism, because that is the accusation. And she is, they're arguing that because she's a woman of color, she's being scrutinized more than anyone else. So it's an accusation of racism, and people take racism seriously. You don't want to be accused of racism when you aren't guilty of it. So it's often very effective to deflect it that way, because the person who's doing the criticism might not want to pursue it, lest they be seen as racist. But rest assured that it didn't work, because this exchange got endlessly retweeted and shown across progressive left YouTube. And let me tell you something, progressives, like real progressives, real leftists, can sniff the fakes very easily. And they will not defend someone like Dianne Morales. Like, the moment that all this was revealed about Dianne Morales, she absolutely lost any respect from the majority of progressives, because she revealed to essentially be a neoliberal, a liberal centrist, a status quo defender. So, this is not an uncommon strategy used by a lot of liberal centrists. And the best example of this is, of course, Hillary Clinton, who blamed her 2016 election loss not on the fact that she stood for nothing, had a terrible agenda, and was basically a corporatist, Goldman Sachs loving, warmongering ghoul. No, it was sexism, especially from the Bernie bros, which he constantly accused of being sexist and not being, quote, with her. Not quote, hashtag with her. And it is true that Bernie Sanders' support back in 2016 was not as diverse as it was in 2020, when it was definitely a very multicultural, multi-identity group. In 2016, yes, a lot of Bernie bros were white men, young white men. But that still doesn't mean that her loss was as a result of sexism. And, this was used constantly as an excuse, bashing Bernie Sanders, despite the fact that Hillary Clinton's agenda really wasn't going to do that much for the very identities, minorities that she supposedly defends. So that's the irony of it. If the person most likely to come to power and push forward a real progressive agenda happens to be an old white man, guess what? That's a good thing. Yes, we all would want to see the first female president of the US. That would be a good thing. Just not necessarily this female, because she doesn't stand for anything. And in fact, if a white old man like Bernie Sanders came to power and pushed forward a progressive agenda, it would probably increase the likelihood that the first female president of the United States would actually also have a real progressive agenda. So this was, Bernie Sanders losing to Clinton was lose-lose for kind of everyone. Because then she ended up losing to Trump. And with that in mind, I saw this video also on Twitter a couple of weeks before, and I immediately saw this and I was like, oh my god, this is like the quintessential video of exactly what I'm describing right now. And I saved it and I need to show it because, oh my god, this is this strategy in action. So at first, context, when I first saw it, I had no idea who these people are. And so my first kind of immediate reaction is, okay, well, she's black, she's a woman. I assume she is the progressive in this exchange rather than the white guy. But let's watch.
The breadth of knowledge and wisdom and experience of both of our candidates. I'm very proud of our party. I have to say, in terms of this debate, It really does agitate me. I don't know if there was some sort of a, secret meeting of progressives that determined what defines a progressive. And I'm really tired of people sort of trying to mansplain to me what that is. I am an unapologetic progressive. I know what a progressive looks like, and I know what they do. And you cannot do in 3 days or 30 days what Secretary Clinton has been doing for 30 years. She is a progressive.
Anyway, I want to show this again because I want you to note the fake smile, what I call corpo smile. It is a smile that I always see, especially in Americans, more than any other people on this planet. And I think it's this fake smile that comes as a result of always, having to kiss ass in American corporate environments. And this American insistence of always appearing happy and eager. And you see it throughout the video, and that's when you kind of notice the fakeness of it all. If she had been the Bernie Sanders aide, I don't think she would have acted this way, because I think the people who were part of Bernie Sanders' team were people who were genuinely convinced about what they were fighting for, not shilling for corporations the way and then claiming you're the real progressive. But look at that smile. Just look at it.
The breadth of knowledge and wisdom and experience of both of our candidates. I'm very proud of our party. I have to say, in terms of this debate, it really does agitate me. I don't know if there was some sort of a, secret meeting of progressives that determined what defines a progressive.
Yeah, that's a good sign that you're not an actual progressive. I don't see many progressives doing this kind of performative smiling. But anyway, you get the picture, and you get why this argument is so cowardly. And like I said, sadly, it's sometimes effective. But I think it's an argument that has to be fought against, and we need to fight against the encroachment of left spaces by people who aren't real progressives. Because if they see that certain issues or certain attitudes, a certain rhetoric is appealing, more appealing than traditional liberal centrist talking points, which are not appealing anymore. They're just not. You can't run on like a Bill Clinton agenda. And I know what you're going to say. Well, Biden won and won. Yes, I think there was a lot of circumstantial conditions at the time. The fact that Trump was his opponent and not just another standard Republican. But it's really hard to run on these things nowadays because people feel that the system has failed them. So it is important to note when someone is trying to encroach on leftist spaces, because it'll crowd out the real leftists. And we've seen that with wokeness. We've seen that with how, for example, corporations now take an almost comical version of woke social liberalism and promote it in reasons that are clearly dishonest and just being done for money. And the end result is that wokeness is now essentially hated by everyone. And it shouldn't be that way. Not because wokeness itself is bad. It's just the way that it's been promoted by non-leftists, as well as the very fringe leftists, like the real kind of crazy woke. But no, these are all values that I think leftists should stand for. Defending minorities, defending women, giving minorities and women spaces. That's what we want. That's what we want to achieve. What we don't want is to achieve it for people like Dianne Morales or Hillary Clinton, even less. So, on that note, I hope you enjoy this video. Please like, please share, please subscribe, and there'll be more content on the way. Thanks.